Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my review of the best new G-Shock model that I've seen in 2022. And I can say that with a fair degree of confidence given that today is the 31st of December. Happy New Year to you all when it comes. I think 2022 was the year that the CASIOOOOOOOO, the 2100 model line, reached full maturity. We finally got Bluetooth and solar early in the year and the long-awaited full metal towards the middle of the year. I think people therefore are looking for the next new G-Shock, and the watch on my wrist today, the GA-B001, may be just what they are looking for. It clearly takes a lot of its inspiration from the 2100 range and its module, but takes a totally different direction when it comes to the case. Now, I'm personally very selective about which Gs I buy and wear based on not how they look, but how they fit. So I'm really pleased to see more slim and wearable G-Shocks like this one on the market. Don't get me wrong, it's still a G-Shock, it's still big and chunky, but it's actually quite manageable on wrist. Now, you saw the pop-up? This video is sponsored by CASIO Australia. I will therefore leave a link to their website in the description of the video, and I'll talk today in Aussie dollars. But I won't focus too much on price. You're all smart shoppers. You're all more than capable of finding the best deals on these for you in your local region, your local currency, I have no doubt. Now, there are 4 different colour versions of the GA-B001 available at launch. I've got all 4. Let's flip the camera and have a look at them. So what, dear viewers, are we going to do today then? Well, because I've got 4 different watches, which can be further grouped into 2 pairs, I think, I thought I'd start with some lovely macro footage of all 4 watches outside and on my wrist, pocket shots, etc, etc. That way we can have a good look at them aesthetically, as well discussing the differences within the range. Now, the module in these is very similar to the one in the 2100, so I'm not going to spend too long running through the features and functions, but I will show you the basics, don't worry. Now, because this is a brand new model, I thought a bit of context might help as well. So I've got some comparative shots of this one next to a 5600 and a 2600, both side by side and on wrist, so you can get a good idea of the relative size and scale. Then the moans and niggles section. Just because it's the best new G of the year doesn't mean to say I can't find things to complain about. Now, these are on loan to me from CASIO Australia and I have to send them back, but if I didn't, then I would have ended the video by pulling one of these apart. The construction is really interesting on this one. Thankfully though, I can show you it using one of their official photographs. Unusually for a G, the band is integrated with the bezel, and both are part of the same structure, or structures, as it's 2 pieces, held together by those 2 screws on the side, and further held to the carbon core by 2 screws at each end. Looking at the watch though, it is nigh on impossible to tell the joints are seamless. Alright, so the B-roll has been rolling then, and you've had a good look at the red one already. I think the red and the stealth black model numbers in the top corner, if you hadn't already noticed, should be treated as a bit of a pair. The specs on all 4 watches are identical, they have the same movement, the same features and functions therefore, but they're not all made of the same material. The red and black one feature a slightly different grade of resin than the other 2 variants, which are translucent. Now, the resin on the black and red is marginally softer to the touch, marginally more flexible, and therefore, in my opinion, marginally more comfortable on wrist. But there isn't a huge difference between them, to be honest. It's what I would describe as marginal. Now, I'm sure you've already spotted both differences and similarities between these GA-B001s and the GA-B2100, for example. In terms of similarities, the modules they use are similar but not quite identical. The 2100 contains a module 5689, whereas this one contains a module 5690. Technically, the biggest difference though is that these have Bluetooth but no solar. They're powered instead by a pair of SR726 batteries, which will last 2 years on average between changes. So you get the Bluetooth setting and timekeeping updates, but you do have to change the batteries occasionally. They both have that distinctive Ani-Digi look though. The digital display on this one has been allowed to expand a bit. It's both larger and sits higher relative to the dial, and the third multifunction indicator hand at the 9 o'clock has been replaced by a squarish lattice sitting on top of a horizontally striped section for this new model. It doesn't have a battery indicator because it isn't solar as discussed, and it doesn't have the day of the week indicator like the battery CASIOOOOOOOs. Instead, the third hand is effectively a mode indicator only. That's the first 2 then, the red and the black. black, I suppose we ought now to consider the dimensions and specifications. As I said, they're all the same. They're 46mm across the middle at the widest point. Now thickness does vary on these because the bezel is uneven, from 12mm at the thinnest point to 14mm at the thickest. No lug to lug on these today. You saw the bezel and the band are fully integrated. If I had to put a figure on it though, I would call this one at about 48mm. Lug width is also not applicable. You are not going to be putting this one on an aftermarket strap unless people start to make complete aftermarket straps and bezels, which I think is unlikely unless this one goes insanely popular. Weight though, thanks to the carbon core, is a mere 50 grams. As I said, this is definitely one of the most wearable G-Shocks that I've come across recently. Moving on to the translucent pair then. This is actually the first time I've come across a translucent G-Shock. I know that the so-called jellyfish CASIO was very popular, and I can see why these are both fun and colourful. As noted though, the resin is a little less compliant than the previous two models, not massively stiff by any means, just a bit less flexible on wrist and in hand. One thing I did notice that I should probably have anticipated: when these watches are on wrist, you get a ringside seat, a front row view of your own arm hair. Slightly disconcerting at first, but I'm sure I would get used to it. I'm sure you've spotted already, there's a lot going on with this design. It seems that Casio have deliberately added details and curves and angles to pretty much every single surface on the watch. Even the buckle of the band has got extra little cutouts. The retainer, rather than having a single top surface, has 5 different angled surfaces. And it's the same with the watch itself. The bezel is raised to protect the crystal from scratches, but it's raised to 4 distinct peaks. There are facets, that's how the hex head screw bolts holding the bezel and case together are engaged. Those then continue down into the band. The 4 pushers are textured. The A pusher, if you will, the one that operates the light in the top right corner, is actually different from the others. There's some extra colour on there as well as extra texture, and that's before we even get to the dial. Now it's a moulded dial with indices that are therefore raised. There are multiple levels to the dial. The indices are a mixture of circles, rectangles and 2 completely unique shapes at the 12 and the 6. Again, like the band, there are multiple facets at the 130, 730 and 1030, and being a Casio, there is of course a heap of dial text. And then there is that third hand lattice sitting on top of the striped background. In short, there is a lot going on here. The Casio design team have turned this one up to 11 out of 10. Now that is going to please some, but not others, I'm sure. But hey, you're not short of choice within the Casio G-Shock range if this one is a bit too much for you. What about functions then? Well, everything should be pretty familiar if you've owned a G-Shock in the past, especially if you've owned a 2100. There's a tiny bit of loom on the 2 main hands, useful in a pinch, but not a massive priority because the top right pusher operates the light, or should that be lights. 2 LEDs, 1 white LED to backlight the LCD and 1 to illuminate the dial and handset. You can adjust this to either 1.5 seconds or 3 seconds of backlighting, depending on how much you like your batteries or not. Bottom left is the mode button. This is where the funky lattice and patterning comes into effect. You can see when I press it, the marker that is pointing to 12 swings around to 4. 4 is world time, then stopwatch, then timer, then alarm, and then back to 12. For world time, it's the usual selection of 38 world cities available. Stopwatch is operated by pressing the bottom right button on and off. It measures up to 24 hours down to 1/100th of a second. Split times are possible, as are times for first and second place if you're timing some kind of competition or a race. The timer has a countdown from 1 second right up to 24 hours. There are 5 daily alarms as usual. You can switch on and off the hourly chime signal and the alarm, all the usual good stuff. A couple of other nice features: you can shift the analog hands out of the way if they're fouling the digital display by pressing the top right and bottom left buttons together, and you can switch the date month, day for North American or Euro preferences. Now I really appreciate this feature on my Square G, and I'm sure I would enjoy it on this one as well. Accuracy of plus or minus 15 seconds per month without the Bluetooth link. When using the Bluetooth link, it updates 4 times per day. Now I would show you the app today, but I've shown you it plenty of times before. It makes setting the alarms in the world cities super easy and ensures that the watch on your wrist is always set to the right time. I mean the exact time, which is kind of the point of wearing a watch, isn't it? So a quick size comparison then. I've got a 7-inch wrist, which you probably already know by now. My go-to G-Shock is the Square, pretty much any of the 5600 range. And here my arm is adorned with the most basic of that range. Here my arm is adorned by my CASIOOOOOOO, larger but still eminently wearable thanks at least in part to the slimness and the lack of weight, only 53 grams. Here my arm is adorned with the GA-B001, perhaps just a little bit bigger and bulkier than the 2100, but it's actually lighter than the 2100, so it doesn't feel all that different, to be honest. Then back down to the CASIOOOOOOO and then back down to the square again. And here is the new model compared to the older models side by side. You can notice a step up in size and scale from the Square G, but really this one is right on par with the 2100 range, I think. Like I said, it's great to see Casio releasing these new models with wear, comfort and fit top priorities. Alright, the moans and niggles section then. Well, I mentioned it a couple of times, the translucent ones are a little bit stiffer and not quite as nice to the touch as the other two. Maybe you can see that here when I flex the tail of the band. It's just not quite as compliant, meaning it's not going to hug the wrist quite as nicely as the black or the red versions currently do. And styling, it's full on, and it's from the front of the watch, to the back of the watch, to the sides of the watch, everywhere. It's going to be too much for some people, therefore, I'm sure. And not for the first time this year, none of these models are particularly legible. Perhaps they are meant for younger eyes than mine, but where is the model that's actually for people who want to tell the time? All four digital displays are negative, which are tricky to read in the first place, and none of the analog handsets really stands out against the dials, certainly not in the way that the hands and indices of my 2100 stand out against its dial. Now, Casio being Casio, I'm sure these won't be the only four colour versions of this watch eventually released. I just wish that when they launched a new model range, they would have at least one that was properly legible and was designed as such with a positive display and prominent hands and indices. It's certainly not going to harm sales having one that's actually easy to read. Alright, so a quick look at prices then before we sign off. These are priced broadly in line with the GA-B 2100s, which means an Australian list price of $299 AUD. I'm sure that will be similar in your own market. So then I think these become viable alternatives to the 2100 line. A broadly similar set of specifications, a broadly similar set of dimensions, and while there are similarities in terms of the looks, there are also some big differences. These GA-B001s are out there in terms of styling. There's just far more going on just about everywhere you look on the watch than on the equivalent colour version of the 2100. And yet, crucially for me, they retain the wearability and fit that made the CASIOOOOOO such a big hit in the first place. So there you have it. If you are over octagons, you should definitely check out one of these. Very similar to the 2100 in terms of its utility, but clearly has a very different look. It's certainly pretty out there in terms of its styling, but I do appreciate the way this one has been constructed. If you don't fancy this one, why not check out some of the plethora of Casio coverage from earlier this year. Thanks for watching. I will see you again in the future, I hope.